So I want to really quickly, hopefully quickly, go over how to find the inverse of the log and how to graph a log. So on number 15 from your homework tonight, I'm going to switch the x and the y. I'm going to move the x to the other side because I like the equal sign on the right. I'm going to subtract that 3. What I need to do is I need to isolate my log. The log, the base, and the of. So I want to isolate this. So anything in front of it, anything behind it needs to move. So I'm going to subtract that 3. And now my log is isolated. So now I'm going to do the little swirly swirly. And I get 1/2 to the x minus 3 equals 2y. I'm now going to multiply by the reciprocal. And what I get is my inverse equals 1/2 times 1/2 to the x minus 3. This right here would be my A. This right here is my B. And since it's between 0 and 1, I know this is dk. And this right here would be my shift left 3. Okay, so now we're going to find the inverse of number 18. So what I'd really like you to do is just pause the video and go ahead and try to do 18 on your own. If you get stuck, then unpause and look at one step, and then pause it again and see if you can continue. I'm going to switch the x and the y. So I'm going to get x equals log base 2 of 8 to the y minus 1. I'm going to move the x to the other end. That's just something that I have to do. My log is isolated here. Okay, my log, my base, and the of. So I'm going to go right to exponents now. Okay, 2 to the x equals 8 to the y minus 1. And I'm solving for y here. Now, this is an interesting one where what can I do here? Well, I have to remember that if I'm stuck, I need to try to make my bases the same. So I have 2 to the x here, but I know I can make 2 cubed to the y minus 1. Same thing, right? And now that my bases are the same, I can set my exponents equal to each other. So x equals 3y minus 3. And I solve this for y. I get the inverse is going to be 1/3 x plus 3. Plus 1, sorry. 1/3 x plus 1. So yes, the inverse of this log will be linear. So now we're going to graph number 20 from the worksheet. And I know I can't plug into x and figure out what the opposite of log base 2 of 3 minus 1 is by hand. I do know, though, that the inverse of logs is exponents, which we just found out, and I do know that I know how to graph an exponential by hand. So I'm going to go to the inverse first. So I'm going to take and switch the x and the y. So I get negative log base 2 of y plus 2 minus 1 equals x. Okay, and like I said before, to go to inverses, we need to isolate log, which would be from the letter L through that parenthesis. This is my base, so this is log base 2 of y plus 2. So the first thing I need to do is add that 1 and divide by the negative 1. So I'm going to get log base 2 of y plus 2 equals, and add the 1, and then if I divide everything by the negative 1, these will both become negative. Okay, now my log is isolated, so now I can do the swirly. And this would be 2 to the negative x minus 1 equals y plus 2. Now I get the inverse. I'm going to say 2 to the negative x minus 1, and I'm going to subtract that 2 over. Now this negative right here indicates that this is a negative exponent. So if I factor that out, I now have 2 to the negative 1 times x plus 1. 2 to the negative 1 is 1/2. So my exponential is 1/2 to the x plus 1 minus 2. I know that a is 1, b is 1/2, and I'm going to graph. So I'm going to graph negative 1, 1 times 1 over b, which will give me 2. Negative 1, 2. I'm going to graph 0, a. I'm going to graph 1, a times b. Now I know I need to shift these. I'm going to go backwards 1 and down 2. So my 2 shifts are going to be backwards 1 and down 2. So I'm going to take each point and go backwards 1 and down 2. Backwards 1 and down 2. Backwards 1 and down 2. And I also know that my horizontal asymptote moves down from y equals 0 to y equals negative 2. So my graph is going to look like this. And I am going to erase those other pink points. So the new table is negative 2, 0, negative 1, negative 1, and 0, negative 1.5. Okay, now remember, I don't want the inverse, I actually want the log. So I don't want the exponential, I want the log. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the points from the log and switch them 0, negative 2, negative 1, negative 1, and negative 1.5, 0. And I'm going to plot them. 0, negative 2, negative 1, negative 1, no, and negative 1/2, 1.5, 0. The interesting thing about logs is everything switches. The x and the y switch in the coordinates. The horizontal asymptote switches to a vertical asymptote. And I'm going to create my graph, and it will look like this. One last thing I want you to see is we're going to do the domain and the range of the exponential. We know the domain is negative infinity to positive, and we know the range is negative 2 to positive. Now if we look at the domain and the range of the actual log function, so this guy is the actual log function. The domain of that actually is left side to right side, and the range of that is bottom to top. So notice not only did my x and y switch, my horizontal switched to a vertical asymptote for the log, but my domain and range also flipped to range and domain. So everything in inverses switches. I hope this helps.